The air in Washington, D.C. was electric as the White House prepared for one of the most significant diplomatic tours of the Trump administration. Saudi Arabia, a critical ally in the Middle East, awaited the arrival of President Donald Trump and his team. It was a tour designed to fortify ties, discuss regional security, and perhaps most importantly, strengthen economic cooperation. For Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, this trip was more than just a diplomatic exercise. It was a chance to prove herself on a global stage. Known for her sharp responses and unwavering loyalty to the president, Karoline was already a rising star in the administration. However, what she would do in the coming days would shock not just her colleagues but the entire world. The tour began like any other state visit, with the president, accompanied by a large entourage, stepping off Air Force One onto the blazing tarmac of King Khalid International Airport. The desert sun bore down as the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, welcomed Trump with a firm handshake and a warm smile, their entourages following close behind. As Trump and MBS disappeared into the grand halls of the Riyadh Palace for their initial meetings, Karoline, usually seen as a background figure on such trips, found herself caught up in an unexpected series of events. While the president met with the Crown Prince to discuss defense contracts and regional stability, Karoline's role was to coordinate the press coverage and manage the delicate diplomatic narratives that would unfold over the coming days. However, as she settled into her makeshift press office in the palace, she received a whispered message from a Saudi protocol officer, his expression both serious and anxious. "Miss Leavitt," he said, leaning close so no one else could hear, "there is something you must see. It is a matter of utmost importance." Karoline's instincts as a communicator and political operative kicked in. She glanced around the bustling room filled with journalists and security personnel before nodding for the officer to lead the way. They moved quickly through the opulent corridors, past towering marble pillars and beneath glittering crystal chandeliers until they reached a small, private room guarded by two stern-faced Saudi soldiers. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The officer gestured for her to sit as he closed the door behind them. Karoline's heart raced, her mind racing through 100 possible scenarios. Was this a security threat? A scandal waiting to erupt? The officer handed her a thin file, its contents written in a mix of Arabic and English. As Karoline flipped through the pages, her eyes widened. It contained classified information, documents detailing a covert operation involving a high-ranking Saudi official and a group of American defense contractors. The operation, if true, was a ticking time bomb that could not only derail the president's visit but also destabilize relations between the two nations. "Why are you showing me this?" Karoline asked, her voice low and steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Because, Miss Leavitt," the officer replied, his eyes locking onto hers, "we believe you are the only one who can prevent this from spiraling into a diplomatic disaster." Karoline took a deep breath, her mind already calculating the risks and potential fallout. She had a choice, either bury this information to protect the president's mission or take a bold step that could change the course of U.S.-Saudi relations forever. The decision she would make in the coming hours would become one of the most controversial moments of her career, and it would shock the entire world. Karoline sat in the small, dimly lit room, the weight of the documents heavy in her hands. She glanced up at the Saudi officer, his face a mask of controlled urgency. This wasn't just about a minor diplomatic misstep. The contents of the file hinted at something far more dangerous, something that could explode into a full-blown crisis. She took a moment to steady her nerves, then flipped back to the beginning of the file, carefully examining every line. It contained a series of encrypted messages between a powerful Saudi prince and several high-ranking U.S. defense contractors. The messages suggested that a shadowy deal involving the transfer of sensitive military technology was already underway, a deal that bypassed both U.S. and Saudi governmental oversight. Karoline's mind raced. If these documents were real, they posed an enormous threat not only to the United States but also to the stability of the entire Middle East. Worse, if this information leaked, it would provide Trump's political opponents with a scandal large enough to cripple his presidency. She closed the file, her fingers trembling slightly. "Why bring this to me?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a mix of fear and suspicion. "Why not go straight to your crown prince or one of our intelligence officers?" The officer took a step closer, lowering his voice even further. "Because this reaches far beyond Riyadh, Miss Leavitt. We have reason to believe that there are powerful figures within both our governments who want this deal to succeed, regardless of the consequences." You are known for your loyalty and fearlessness, qualities that make you a formidable ally in times like these. Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. The officer's words confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't just a diplomatic oversight or a rogue operation, it was a conspiracy potentially involving some of the most powerful people in the world. She leaned back, forcing herself to think clearly. What exactly do you expect me to do about this? The officer's eyes darkened, his tone turning grave. Help us stop it. You have access to the president and his closest advisors. If you can convince him to take this seriously, we might be able to prevent a disaster. Karoline's mind raced through the implications. If she chose to act, she would be stepping into the center of a storm that could destroy careers, shatter alliances, and even endanger lives. But if she stayed silent, she would become complicit in a betrayal that could reshape the global balance of power. Finally, she leaned forward, locking eyes with the officer. "All right," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I'll help. But if we do this, we do it my way. No leaks, no surprises. We keep this contained until we can confirm the truth." The officer nodded, relief flashing across his face for the briefest moment. "Agreed. I will provide you with everything I know. But be careful, Miss Leavitt. You have just entered a very dangerous game." Karoline sat in the small, dimly lit room, the weight of the documents heavy in her hands. She glanced up at the Saudi officer, his face a mask of controlled urgency. This wasn't just about a minor diplomatic misstep. The contents of the file hinted at something far more dangerous, something that could explode into a full-blown crisis. She took a moment to steady her nerves, then flipped back to the beginning of the file, carefully examining every line. It contained a series of encrypted messages between a powerful Saudi prince and several high-ranking U.S. defense contractors. The messages suggested that a shadowy deal involving the transfer of sensitive military technology was already underway, a deal that bypassed both U.S. and Saudi governmental oversight. Karoline's mind raced. If these documents were real, they posed an enormous threat not only to the United States but also to the stability of the entire Middle East. Worse, if this information leaked, it would provide Trump's political opponents with a scandal large enough to cripple his presidency. She closed the file, her fingers trembling slightly. "Why bring this to me?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a mix of fear and suspicion. "Why not go straight to your crown prince or one of our intelligence officers?" The officer took a step closer, lowering his voice even further. "Because this reaches far beyond Riyadh, Miss Leavitt. We have reason to believe that there are powerful figures within both our governments who want this deal to succeed regardless of the consequences. You are known for your loyalty and fearlessness, qualities that make you a formidable ally in times like these." Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. The officer's words confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't just a diplomatic oversight or a rogue operation, it was a conspiracy potentially involving some of the most powerful people in the world. She leaned back, forcing herself to think clearly. "What exactly do you expect me to do about this?" The officer's eyes darkened, his tone turning grave. "Help us stop it. You have access to the president and his closest advisors. If you can convince him to take this seriously, we might be able to prevent a disaster." Karoline's mind raced through the implications. If she chose to act, she would be stepping into the center of a storm that could destroy careers, shatter alliances, and even endanger lives. But if she stayed silent, she would become complicit in a betrayal that could reshape the global balance of power. Finally, she leaned forward, locking eyes with the officer. "All right," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I'll help. But if we do this, we do it my way. No leaks, no surprises. We keep this contained until we can confirm the truth." The officer nodded, relief flashing across his face for the briefest moment. "Agreed. I will provide you with everything I know. But be careful, Miss Leavitt. You have just entered a very dangerous game." Karoline returned to her quarters in the guest wing of the sprawling Riyadh palace, her mind still reeling from the gravity of what she had just uncovered. She locked the door behind her, dropping into the plush leather chair by the window as she pulled out her encrypted tablet. The desert sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the marble floors. She knew she had to act quickly, but she couldn't risk sending a message that could be intercepted. Instead, she opted for an old-school approach, a handwritten note. She scribbled down a few carefully chosen words on a piece of White House stationery, folded it neatly, and slipped it into a sealed envelope. She then called one of her most trusted aides, a former Marine with a knack for discretion. He appeared at her door within minutes, his tall frame filling the doorway as he gave her a questioning look. "Take this to the president," Karoline whispered, handing him the envelope. "Personally. And make sure no one else touches it." The aide took the envelope without a word, his eyes hard with understanding. Karoline watched him disappear down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just set a plan in motion that could either save the administration or destroy it. As she turned back to her desk, her phone buzzed with a secure message. It was from the Saudi officer she had met earlier. The message contained a single line: "Meet me in the garden at midnight. We have much to discuss." Karoline felt a flicker of unease. The palace gardens were vast and poorly lit at night, a perfect place for an ambush or worse. But she had no choice. If she wanted to understand the full scope of this conspiracy, she would have to take the risk. Hours later, as the palace grew quiet and the last of the diplomatic dinners wound down, Karoline slipped into the garden, her dark cloak blending seamlessly with the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and freshly watered grass, the quiet broken only by the distant chirping of crickets. She moved cautiously through the twisting paths, her eyes straining to pick out any sign of movement in the darkness. Finally, she reached the small fountain at the center of the garden, its cool water trickling softly into the marble basin. She glanced around, her nerves taut as a bowstring, when a figure stepped out from behind a tall, neatly trimmed hedge. It was the Saudi officer, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He wasted no time, slipping a small, encrypted USB drive into her hand. "This contains everything we know about the operation," he whispered, his tone urgent. "Names, dates, financial transfers, enough to bring this entire conspiracy to light." Karoline clutched the drive tightly, her mind racing. "Why trust me with this?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The officer hesitated for a moment before replying. "Because, Miss Leavitt, you are known for your integrity and courage. You are the only one we believe can stop this without causing a global crisis." Before Karoline could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the garden, the crunch of gravel under heavy boots. The officer's eyes widened, and he took a step back, his face suddenly pale. "They found us," he whispered urgently. "Run. Now." Without another word, the officer disappeared into the darkness, his footsteps fading into the night. Karoline hesitated for a split second before turning and sprinting back toward the palace, her heart hammering in her chest. As she burst through the side door into the cool, marble-lined hallway, she glanced back over her shoulder. She caught a glimpse of shadowy figures moving swiftly through the garden, their movements precise and coordinated, clearly professionals. Karoline didn't slow down until she reached her quarters, locking the door behind her as she leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. She clutched the USB drive to her chest, her mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. She had just crossed a line, one that could not be uncrossed. Whatever happened next, she was now fully committed to this fight, and she would not back down. Karoline sat on the edge of her bed, her breaths coming in short, panicked bursts. She quickly reached for her tablet, plugging the encrypted USB drive into its side port. The screen lit up, a flurry of security prompts and encryption checks flashing before her eyes. She had no time to waste. The figures she had seen in the garden were clearly part of a larger force, professionals sent to silence anyone who got too close to the truth. She couldn't risk another encounter like that, not without a clear plan. The drive's contents finally loaded, revealing a dizzying array of files, emails, transaction records, surveillance photos, and private chat logs. It was a digital treasure trove of evidence, the kind that could bring down empires if handled correctly. As Karoline scanned through the files, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The operation was far more extensive than she had initially feared. It involved not just rogue Saudi officials and American defense contractors, but also powerful political figures in Washington, London, and even Berlin. She opened one of the chat logs, her pulse quickening as she recognized the names of several influential lobbyists and former government officials. The messages discussed the transfer of advanced military technology, the kind of hardware that could tip the scales in any conflict, or worse, fall into the hands of America's enemies. The most chilling part, however, was the realization that some of these figures were people she had met, shaken hands with, and even dined alongside during her years in Washington. They had all played the part of loyal patriots, but behind closed doors, they were profiting from a betrayal that could spark a global crisis. Karoline's mind raced. She couldn't trust anyone, not even some of Trump's closest advisors. She needed a way to alert the president without tipping off their enemies. But how? Then, an idea struck her. She recalled the envelope she had sent earlier through her loyal aide. It would reach Trump soon, but she needed more than just a whispered warning. She needed undeniable proof, something so explosive that it couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug. Karoline grabbed her secure phone, quickly typing out a message to her aide. Situation critical. Arrange private. Secure meeting with POTUS. No one else. Urgent. She hit send, her heart still racing as she turned back to the files on the USB drive. There was one folder, marked simply Operation Desert Mirage, that caught her attention. She clicked it open, her eyes narrowing as she scrolled through the contents. It contained a series of high-level documents detailing a covert arms deal disguised as a humanitarian aid mission. The scale of the operation was staggering, billions of dollars in military hardware, including advanced drones, missile defense systems, and experimental cyber weapons, all being funneled through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. Karoline's hands trembled as she realized the implications. If this deal went through, it would not only destabilize the Middle East but also undermine America's strategic position globally. Worse, it would confirm the worst fears of Trump's political enemies, that his administration had allowed, or perhaps even encouraged, such corruption. Suddenly, a soft chime echoed from her phone. It was a message from her aide, the words both a relief and a chilling reminder of the stakes. Meeting confirmed. Midnight secure location. Be careful. Karoline exhaled, her mind already strategizing the next move. She had less than 24 hours to prepare, to gather enough evidence, craft her message, and confront the most powerful man in the world with a truth that could shatter his presidency. As she shut down the tablet and slipped the USB drive into her jacket pocket, a new determination filled her. She might be walking into a firestorm, but she would do so with her head held high. Whatever the cost, she would see this through to the end. As the clock approached midnight, Karoline made her way through the labyrinthine halls of the Riyadh Palace, her pulse a steady drumbeat in her ears. The palace, usually buzzing with the constant hum of diplomats and security personnel, now felt eerily quiet, the shadows stretching longer as the night deepened. Her aide had chosen a secure conference room tucked away in one of the less trafficked wings of the palace. It was a risky location, isolated but less likely to be monitored by the countless eyes and ears that watched their every move. She pushed open the heavy oak door, her eyes adjusting to the dim, softly lit interior. Trump was already inside, his massive frame leaning over a polished conference table as he scanned the handwritten note she had sent earlier. His expression, usually a confident mask of self-assurance, was deeply furrowed with concern. Karoline closed the door behind her, locking it securely before stepping forward. Trump looked up, his sharp, calculating gaze locking onto hers. "Karoline," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "What the hell is going on?" She took a deep breath, pulling the encrypted USB drive from her pocket and placing it on the table in front of him. "Mr. President, what I'm about to tell you could change everything. I need you to trust me." Trump's eyes flicked from the drive to her face, a hint of suspicion flashing in his eyes. But he didn't interrupt, gesturing for her to continue. "I've uncovered a plot, a massive, covert arms deal involving some of the most powerful figures in both our governments. It's bigger than anything we've ever faced. If this deal goes through, it will destabilize the entire Middle East and potentially drag the United States into another unwinnable conflict." Trump's jaw tightened, his large hands clenching into fists on the table. "You'd better have proof, Karoline. This isn't a game." Karoline nodded, her fingers trembling as she plugged the USB drive into the secure laptop on the table. The screen flickered to life, the files she had seen earlier spilling out across the monitor. As Trump leaned in, his eyes scanned the documents, financial records, intercepted messages, satellite images of secret arms shipments. His face darkened with each passing second, his breathing growing heavier. This is treason," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. These people, they're selling out their own country for profit. Karoline felt a wave of relief at his reaction. She had feared he might dismiss her concerns, or worse, suspect her of betrayal. But Trump's fury was real, his anger palpable. There's more, she continued, clicking into the folder marked Operation Desert Mirage. This is the heart of the conspiracy. It's not just about selling weapons, it's about controlling the balance of power in the entire region. They're playing both sides, Mr. President. Using America's military might as a bargaining chip to enrich themselves. Trump slammed his fist down on the table, the sound echoing through the small room. We need to shut this down. Now. Karoline met his eyes, her own filled with a fierce determination. I've already started taking steps to contain this. But we need to move quickly. There are powerful forces at play here, and they won't hesitate to silence anyone who gets in their way, including you. Trump leaned back, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the table. For a moment he said nothing, his mind clearly racing as he processed the magnitude of the betrayal. Finally he nodded, his jaw set in a hard line. All right, Karoline. You've got my full backing. Whatever it takes, we'll burn this conspiracy to the ground. Karoline felt a surge of relief, her shoulders finally relaxing as she realized that she had not only saved the president's mission but potentially the security of the entire world. As she stepped back into the cool night air of the palace courtyard, the weight of her actions hit her fully. She had crossed a line tonight, one that would change the course of her career and perhaps even her life. But as she looked up at the stars scattered across the Saudi sky, she felt a deep sense of resolve. She had chosen the harder path, the one less traveled. And for that, history would remember her not just as a press secretary but as a patriot who stood against corruption when it mattered most.